You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast, brought to you by focus-biz.com.
CEOs and entrepreneurs, if you're struggling to have the highest performance and owning a business are weighing you down. With us today is a mindset and performance coach. His name is Byron Morrison. He has been in the business for over 10 years, and he's going to talk about transitioning from founder or manager into a CEO, how we can improve our time, energy, and performance management strategies. In addition, the dark side of success and the truth about mental and emotional strain while running a business. Byron, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I love everything that you want to talk about. I think it's so important from the dark side of business ownership and everything. But first, I want to learn more about your journey. Where did it first start and how did it bring you into what you're doing today?
Yeah, so my journey started just over 10 years ago. Like, I was at a point in my life where I had this big, shocking family event. My dad had cancer, he had most of his bowels surgically removed. He spent 25 days in ICU, most on life support and breathing through a tracheostomy. And luckily, he pulled through, something I'm eternally grateful for. But that experience took me on this journey of turning my own life around. I went on to write my first best-selling book, and I started a company working with people from around the world to really take control of their health and their lives. While I was really good at the helping people part, truth be told, I was completely in over my head when it came to running a business. I'd never managed a team. I'd never dealt with big decisions. I'd never had all these competing priorities. And I just became completely overwhelmed by everything that was going on. I remember just looking at my calendar with this feeling of dread over the fire that I had to face next. And I just got pushed to a point where I was burnt out and exhausted. And I knew that if I didn't find a way to turn this around, I was going to have to throw in the towel. And I didn't want to do that. So I'd made a decision to figure out, okay, let's figure out how I can actually become the leader my business needed. I started reading books, doing courses, getting coached and mentored on everything from psychology to mindset, high performance, leadership, managing people, like anything I could to really figure out what I needed to do to be effective in my role. And then at the time, I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners on their health and well-being. And when we were looking at their stress and their sleep and why they were feeling the way they were, all these challenges came up from their team to the big decisions to competing stakeholders and priorities. And I realized that helping them navigate it wasn't just my superpower, it's what I love to do. And that was very much the natural evolution of my business. It was since then I've written 3 more best-selling books and I've helped CEOs in 16 countries, very much all going through what I did, who was a founder, who was great at what they did, but didn't really know how to actually be that CEO. So that's kind of like a top level of the last 10 years of my life.
I love that, Byron. It's so important for us business owners to be self-aware and reflect on our own shortcomings and our strengths because we're learning things for the first time. And it's that fight or flight. Do you want to resist it and run away or take that challenge head on like you did for yourself? And that transition from either regular employee, salaried employee, or just regular like founder or manager into a CEO, I'm sure there have been mistakes along the way that you've noticed from others or even yourself. Can you go into some of those mistakes that we kind of make early on in that role?
So a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, the way that they build momentum and get traction is by hustling, grinding, and putting in the work. And we get to this point where we start a business because we wanted freedom, whereas actually we're now working 60+ hour weeks and it feels like there's never enough minutes in the day to catch up. And while that may work when you're a founder or manager and you're trying to get it off the ground, when you step into the CEO role, it's a completely different position. What a lot of founders overlook is the fact that your focus has to become far more honed in because now it's not just about developing growth. You have to manage a team. You have to keep stakeholders happy. You have to overlook the day-to-day operations and the strategy and the vision. Like if you try and do all of it, you're going to stretch yourself thin and that's where you burn out. And that's why one thing I always say in my books and to my clients is if you want to be a highly effective CEO, what you don't do is just as important as what you do. Because at the end of the day, there's only so much time and everything you take on has a cost. So you really need to figure out like, what is it that you're actually good at? What's your zone of genius? Where does your time have the greatest impact? And then you need to delegate and get off your plate everything else.
That is so important for us to realize that we can't do it ourselves. There's only so much time available to us. And that's why we're building this team, right? We need to be able to figure out what tasks and priorities we need to delegate, what things we're going to take care of, like the big vision, the big picture. And I imagine that's where a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs become the actual bottleneck within the business. They're not able to scale or grow because of the CEO themselves. Can you go into more detail about how we become our own bottlenecks?
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like the reason why the CEO becomes the bottleneck in the business is because they're used to thinking like a founder where they had to be involved in everything. Now, if they try and do it at that next level, they're just involved in too many areas and they just can't keep up. And it's like there was one client I was working with a few months ago. Like he had a running joke in his office that the team knew that if they asked for a decision or if they sent him something, they weren't going to hear back for at least 2 weeks. And he's just like, yeah, I know I need to change it, but the thing is, like, when it's your baby and you start the business, you want it done a particular way. And that's where you really get in your own head because you convince yourself other people can't do it as well as you. And that's why whenever someone comes to me and they're struggling with delegation, it's generally because of one of three reasons. Either they haven't hired the right team, in which case it's a foundational level. You need to look at your hiring practices or make big changes, or it's that they haven't given their team the opportunity to step up and prove themselves, or they haven't given them enough time to let them settle in. And if it's the other two, you've really got to accept people make mistakes. People need guidance and support. And yes, you might be able to do it better or quicker. But if you try and do everything, that's where you're going to fall behind on the tasks that only you can do. So it's really got about recognizing that great companies aren't built by one person. They're built by a team of people coming together, working towards a goal.
Oh, absolutely. And for us as CEOs, entrepreneurs, business owners, we're trying to get to that next level. We want to attain our end goal. And with our team, we kind of experience this, it's our own baby. So we kind of want to have that control over what's being done. But oftentimes, once you empower people with the right knowledge, the tools, and you're able to communicate what your expectations are to the team, you'll be pleasantly surprised at what they're capable of and what they actually bring to the table. They can bring in new ideas, a different approach or strategies to a certain situation. And again, for us as business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, we experience burnout pretty often. We are just trying to reach that end goal. We get excited about an idea, we want to see it through, but that burnout can actually take away from our productivity. Are there any strategies we can use to kind of mitigate some of that burnout as we're trying to do it all?
When burnout happens, like there's a lot of common misperceptions in this world about what burnout actually is. Because you see people who work really hard and then there's this label, they're burnt out. And I don't want to take it away because I know a lot of people are in challenging situations. So I don't want to sound like I'm being harsh here, but most people like that, they're not burnt out. Like they're just tired. This is why they can go on holiday for a couple of weeks, feel come back refreshed and be good. Whereas when you're a business owner and you've pushed for an extensive period of time, your stress, the long hours, the late nights, all of the overwhelm, that really takes its toll on your body. That's the point where 2 weeks off isn't going to help. Like you're going to come back and be in the same situation. So, really, to fix burnout, it comes with a combination of developing the right routines, learning to set boundaries, not just with other people, but with yourself, really being diligent with the work hours that you take on. Because a lot of the time, we're our own worst enemies. Like the pressure and expectations are self imposed. We convince ourselves it needs to be done now. So we just overload ourselves. And then the other part of it as well is also reconnecting regularly with your goals, because it's really easy to get burnt out in your business when you lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing, which tends to happen when you just get stuck in the daily fighting and the grind. And that's why I always say to clients, like weekly, go back, remind yourself, why are you doing this? Are you doing things that are exciting you? That are bringing you joy? Because if you don't want to get up in bed in the morning, something's off. And if you don't get that, you're just going to burn out and resent your business.
Absolutely. And I see this happen with many entrepreneurs and business owners where they get really excited about a project or an idea that they want to implement. They go really hard for in a very short amount of time trying to get this out. And then they end up making themselves tired or stressed out. And it's something we need to realize that sometimes these decisions and projects will take some time. They're self imposed. So we're only fighting against ourselves. And at the end of the day, we can only be as productive as our body and our energy will allow. And there's only so much time, there's only so much energy that we can have. Are there strategies that we can use to be focused and kind of perform at a higher level consistently?
I'll take you through one of my favorite energy management strategies. So, what I found is that most people try and approach every day the same. They want to get up the same time, they want to do the same things, they want to have the same routines. And that's better than nothing, but it's far from optimal. And this is why when I'm working with clients, what I get them to do instead is what I call a mixture of push and pull days. I'll give you an example of it and I'll talk you through it. So, there was a client who came to me and he was absolutely crushing Monday and Tuesday. He was getting loads of work done. He was excited. He was just absolutely dominating it. By Wednesday, though, his energy was dwindling. Like he wasn't as focused. He wasn't getting as much done. Thursday was even worse. Friday was a complete write-off. So essentially, he was having 2 productive days a week. And that was why I suggested to him that we try this push and pull strategy. A push day is a day where you go all out. You take on more work. You have higher bandwidth tasks. A pull day is when you step back. You focus on recovery. You take on less focus intensive tasks and you allow yourself to catch up energy wise. So the way I suggested he did it was that he took a pull day on a Wednesday. I said to him, allow yourself to sleep in, have less focused intensive meetings, finish early, go to the gym, get a massage, play tennis, like whatever you want to do. And at first, he was really resistant. He was like, no, I'm CEO. I should be doing more, not less. Like he felt so much guilt over this idea of slowing down. I was like, just try it and see what happens. And he found that by slowing down on a Wednesday, he was able to come back in with the same level of energy as Monday and Tuesday on a Thursday and Friday. So he essentially went from 2 highly productive days a week to 4 because he allowed his body to catch up. And this is why I'm such a big believer. Like you need to play around with your energy and operate in your own zone. But this setup doesn't work for everyone. Like if I use myself as a different example, like Mondays, for whatever reason, are my least energized days of the week. Like we do a lot of stuff on weekends. Like if I wake up on a Monday and I want to be creative and in the zone, it doesn't happen. Like I do all of my video content and my creative tasks on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Mondays, I sleep in, I do meetings, I do admin tasks, everything else, because that's how my body works. So you've got to test this and figure out what works for you. And it's all about just like, look at when are you energized? When do you need to take that step back? And the reason I love this as well is it's almost giving yourself permission that it's okay. You're not being lazy. It's a pull day. You're focused on recovery and looking at your performance over the course of a week or month, not just in isolation for what you did that day.
I love that you were able to share 2 different examples and just the strategy behind that, because we do want to go hard. We want to give it our best. But as we talked about before, we can't give our best performance if we're struggling. The time that it takes and the energy to focus on certain tasks, ones that are less mentally demanding, we need to work that within our schedule and see what works best for us so that we can be more productive. That rest needs to happen. Same for working out. You shouldn't be working out twice a day for 5 days in a row. Your body needs that rest and recovery time to come back to hit the gym even harder. So it's something that us as business owners, we need to be mindful of. Now, I'm sure that plays a role into making better decisions. If we're more energized, more focused, more aware, can we make better decisions? When should we trust our intuition? Can this help build our confidence? Like short-term problems and like long-term priorities, how does that kind of balance out when it comes to decision making?
So if you want to run a business, you're at times going to have to make very big decisions and you're going to have to know when to take a risk and when to really trust yourself. And this is why you've got to understand that if you look at the best leaders, the reason why they can make the tough calls is they think 5 steps ahead. Like the example I always give to people is Elon Musk. Regardless of how you may feel about him personally, like there's no denying the impact he's had. But if you look back at his track record, he's ridiculed in the media in so many situations. They're like, what a stupid decision. He's being reckless, like all of these things. But the reason why he's able to do that is he's willing to make that short-term loss because he's thinking a few steps ahead and focusing on the gains that he's going to make. And this is why, like business, you've really got to start looking at, okay, what is the outcome that you want and making decisions based on where you want to get to, not just on where you are. It's the same as when a business starts struggling, people go into the scarcity mindset and they stop spending money on advertising. It's like it's the very thing that will help them regain traction. And that's why it's like living in that scarcity mentality, you're always going to fall short. And that's why, like, if you're always playing not to lose instead of to win, you're never going to reach your full potential. And that's why, from a decision-making framework, I always say to people, like, break it down. Like, if you've got a big choice, think of the consequences of the action you need to take, and then the consequence of that, and the consequence of that, positive and negative. And it's then you can start to see, like, what's actually going to happen here. I'll give you a personal example of this because I know there's a lot of kind of business owners on this that can probably relate. When I started my business 10 years ago, I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know how to generate leads. I didn't know how to make sales. Like for the first 12 months, I was just banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out how I could actually get some customers in. And at the time I was following this company, like they help businesses like mine. I'd seen the case studies. Like I was convinced they could help me. I got on a call with them and they're like, it's going to be $10,000 to do this. Now, I'd left corporate world a year ago. I was bootstrapping the business. I was completely broke. This was an insurmountable amount of money. I went to my parents and my friends and I told them I wanted to do it. And they were like, you can't do that. It's too big of a risk. What if it fails? What if it doesn't work out? And unknown to me at the time, because I didn't go and know much about the mindset behind it, like what I sat down and did is I looked at it, it's like, what happens if I don't do this? Well, for the last 12 months, I've tried to figure it out. I haven't. If I carry on for another 6 months, I'm going to run out of money. I'm probably going to have to quit, go and get a job and just give up on everything I'm trying to do. But if I find a way to make this happen, I can get my marketing and sales right. I can start generating some leads. I can get some revenue in. I can start building the business I want. So when I mapped both decisions out into the future, it was clear it was more of a risk not to do it. So I went and got a bank loan, funded it. And if I didn't do that, we wouldn't be talking today. And this is what I'm on about. It's like when it comes to decision making, you have to look into the future because you need to face the discomfort, the pain, and the sacrifice because that's what leads to long-term gains. That doesn't mean be reckless, but make decisions based on the reality you want to create.
I appreciate you sharing that story because it puts an emphasis on the short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain. When we're first starting out, we typically have more time than money, and we're trying to figure things out for ourselves. And sometimes I don't know if it's our pride that gets in the way, but we want to give things an honest effort. But there are times where we need to trust an expert, a skilled professional in their field to be able to help us out. And the decision-making process that went into it, it seems at the end of the day, it's a no-brainer for you. It was the best decision for you. Maybe others, your family or friends, couldn't understand that quite yet, but I'm sure after the fact, they appreciated it much more that you actually went into that. And something that a lot of people don't realize or recognize is, for us business owners, we put out a lot of the positive stuff that happens and is going on in our business. The other side is the dark side that we don't really talk about, the emotional strain that kind of comes from owning a business and running a company. Can you talk more about that dark side that doesn't necessarily get highlighted too much and, how that plays a role into our business and everyday day-to-day operations?
Yeah, like in this day and age, entrepreneurship is like the cool thing to do. You go on Instagram and social media, and everyone's on about having a side hustle and building a business. And they're painting it as this pretty picture as the fast track to private planes, fancy parties, and endless cash. Anyone who's actually run a company knows that is not even close to the real reality. When you're running a business, it's a roller coaster ride of ups and downs. One day you can have your highest high, and 5 minutes later, you're having your lowest low. It's basically like getting up in the morning, getting punched in the gut, and having to pick yourself up, coming back for more. And this is why I believe that you've got to be a special kind of crazy to sign up for this life, because most people just don't have the resilience and the mental ability to deal with it. But then part of the problem, though, is because you're a CEO, you're put on this pedestal. Everyone looks at you like you've got it all together. Like they think, oh, he's got all the answers. He knows what he's doing. So then there's this added pressure that you need to put on this facade. You don't want other people to see that your internal state doesn't match your external success. And this is why I've had thousands of hours of conversations behind closed doors with CEOs who you look at them and you're like, everything's amazing for them. And then they're breaking down. Like, I remember there was one guy I had an application call with. Like, I'd gone on to his LinkedIn before we talked. Like, they were winning awards, they were getting recognition. Everything looked like it was incredible. And we got on the phone and he started breaking down. It was like over the last 18 months, like, it took everything out of him to get to this point. They doubled in size. Like, his wife was barely talking to him. He hadn't seen his kids. Like, he couldn't remember the last time he exercised or got a decent night's sleep. They just closed this new fundraise round. They were about to double in size again. It was like, I don't know if I've got any fight left in me. But because of the pressure on him, he was like backed into a corner. He had a team to deliver for. People were counting on him. He just had to keep pulling himself up and show everyone else and put it on a brave face. And this is why I've been so open, like in my content, talking about the challenges and the struggles and the stuff I've been through, because so many people think they're alone. Like they think they're the only one with these challenges, whereas actually this is something that all of us are feeling. Like it's incredibly loading. It's lonely. It's full of failure and rejection. And it's just kind of what you signed up for. So what I always say to clients is like, if it was easy, anyone would do it. And it would also make for a boring autobiography. So you've kind of got to take the good with the bad.
It's so important and it's a great story to share because it is that forward public facing persona that we're trying to put out into the world. Same as for anyone who's not even a business owner, the pictures and lifestyle that we project out onto our social media, they don't see what happens in the background. Maybe that hour and 30-minute wait to get into the restaurant, but all you see is that beautiful picture of food that's displayed on the plate. You're like, wow, this was an amazing time. And it's true that entrepreneurship is not for everyone. There are entrepreneurs out there, I call them, because they want that end goal of the success or recognition or the money, but they don't realize the struggle that it might take to get there. And I think it's just a perception issue, but you have to be focused on your goals. Now, once we get ourselves realigned, we're feeling better, we're more strategic. Now it's time to grow. Now it's time to scale. How does that kind of play into team management and helping keep people accountable and avoiding these feedback loops and kind of siloing people and information?
I'm glad you brought this up because I was waiting for a segue to go back to something you said before because I didn't want to kind of divert the focus. Like earlier in the conversation, you were talking about setting expectations. And this is one of the biggest traps that I see founders and first time CEOs fall into. Because when you're a founder and entrepreneur, you're used to being this visionary. You have big ideas. You just think of something and you want to dive in and get it done. So you're used to executing and operating at pace, which worked for you to get to a certain level. But what first time CEOs and founders don't recognize is that that doesn't work when you're scaling a team. The reality is people can't read your mind. Just because something makes sense to you doesn't mean it makes sense to everyone else. And this is really where you can be your own worst enemy, just assuming that everyone's on the same page. And that's why it's so important to understand effective leadership isn't just hoping people catch up with you. It's taking them on the ride with you. And I'll give you an example of this. Like there was a client I started working with recently, and he's tried to delegate more and get stuff off his plate. And he came to one of our calls really frustrated because he was like, I delegated this project to a team. They took me through it this morning and they completely missed the mark and got it all wrong. And he was just worrying he hired the wrong people and all of this stuff. And I was like, whenever someone says to me that there's more than one person involved who's made a mistake, there's a red flag. They're doing something wrong, not the individual. So I was like, go back to the team and get them to talk you through why they approached it this way. He did that. And when they went through their thinking, it's like, oh, I see exactly why they came up with this. Like he had done a terrible job communicating it. What he hadn't factored in is what he knew, the information he had, his vision, his understanding. He just threw a load of information at people and he's like, go do this. And that's why if you want to be an effective leader, you have to learn to slow down. You need to communicate, make sure people's on the same page. You also need to make sure that you're holding them to what they need to do. Final example on this, like I had another client come in and he was really annoyed with the fact that a couple of weeks ago, he delegated a task and he found out that someone had only done it that morning. And he was like, if I knew it would take them 2 weeks, I would have done it myself. Like it was only a 2-hour task. And I was like, did you tell them when it needed to get done by? And he was like, no. I was like, well, you've already told me the team is busy. They have that lot on their plate. If you don't set a deadline, it's just going to get added to the to-do list. It's not a priority. They'll get to it when they get to it. And so many first-time leaders overlook this piece. Like you've got to set people expectations. I need you to do this. This is how you do it. And this is when it's done for. If you don't have all of those pieces, that's when people drop the ball and make mistakes or don't follow through. So you've really just got to slow down and think about it. What is it you want? And then how do you hold someone to it to get results?
Absolutely. It's something that as we're trying to grow and build our team, we don't realize as CEOs or business owners, entrepreneurs, what foundational skill set or knowledge that each individual has. And we need to clearly communicate that as we try to grow. It's difficult hiring the right team, but it actually comes back to the CEO, the business owner themselves for not communicating properly. That's something that we need to look at so that we can be more effective when we delegate these tasks and then set those expectations. It's going to be important for our growth and our strategic vision. At the end of the day, what is the one piece of advice that if you could tell your younger self from 10 years ago or even throughout your journey, what would you tell yourself about what you would want to change or get to that next level?
So one of the big things I've learned is what got you to where you are isn't going to get you to where you want to be. And this is why every new level of success is going to require a new level of you. The habits, the behaviors, the way of doing things that got you to where you are actually going to become the very reason why you're stuck. And this is why whenever I'm working with people, the first thing I always get them to figure out is who do they need to become to create the life they want? Because most people just think about, okay, this is the goal I want to achieve, but like, who's the version of you who made that happen? Because when you figure that out, then you can start to look, okay, what did that person do differently? What were the decisions they made? What were the routines they developed or the behaviors they created? Like, if you can paint that picture for yourself, then you can be like, okay, these are the changes I need to make in every area of my life for that to become my reality. And then the reason why I like this is when you're in situations where you got something you don't want to do. You have a tough conversation you don't want to have. You have a project you don't want to work on. Rather than hoping that you're going to get the willpower or motivation, stop and ask yourself, what would the person I want to become do right now? And then push yourself to take that action. Like, it's not easy, but it goes back to that decision making that we spoke about before. It's like making the decisions that other people won't and taking the actions that they never will to create the life you want. So when you start making decisions and taking action as the person you want to become, that's when you actually start evolving into them and building that reality. And that's something that I do on a regular basis. I always stop and think out, okay, I've achieved this. What's the next level? Based on that, what would the version of me who's achieved that do differently? What are they doing that I'm not doing right now? And that really helps me figure out, okay, this is what I need to be focusing on and putting my time and energy into to get to where I want to be.
That's fantastic. Now, it's obvious and evident that you're experienced, you work with tons of clients and have all these results here. With all the resources that you've learned over the years, the coaching, consulting, from the books and the podcast to videos, is there one resource that you may recommend to anyone else to go from where they are now into that next level CEO, entrepreneur to help grow their business?
So the resource for that, depending when the show's coming out, may or may not be available yet. I'm actually working on a second edition of one of my books called The Effective CEO. So in July this year, Effective CEO 2.0 is coming out. And it's going to be essentially for anyone who's like an entrepreneur, business owner, a kind of first time CEO who needs to figure out what they should be doing, how to delegate, how to manage their time, how to make the right decisions to really show up as their business leader, the leader their business needs. It's basically everything I've learned over a decade from working with clients in 16 countries to really become effective in your role. So I'd say to anyone, depending on when the show is released, that's going to be the best place to check out. Follow me on LinkedIn or join my mailing list on my website, byronmorrison.com, and there'll be notifications going out once that's live. I'm really excited to share that with the world. You're the first person I've told properly about this, because I've only started working on it recently. So I'm about 2/3 of the way into it, but it'll be at July this year.
That's very exciting. And it is so perfect how you framed and answered that question, because you pre-answered the three questions I was going to follow up with. The resources, it was going to be what's on the docket for 2024? What are you looking forward to? You already shared that. And then I was going to share what places can people connect with you? And boom, you already shared the social links. This is perfect. I love it.
I do like efficiency.
I love it. And for all the audience members and listeners out there, we're going to have the links to connect with Byron here, his Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn available in the show notes and description. And by the time this is released, I'm sure he will be pretty close to having a waitlist available for his new Effective CEO book. That will be available down in the link show notes as well. Now, Byron, anything else that you want to share with other entrepreneurs or business owners, whether it's like some sort of self-help, something to encourage or motivate them, anything that you haven't shared yet that you want to drive that point home for all of our listeners?
I think just the way I like to wrap this up is just knowing the audience. Please just learn to cut yourself some slack. Like, the problem with being a high achiever is you put all of these standards and these expectations and this pressure on yourself. And while it's amazing, like, it's a big motivator to get you to be better, the problem is you can very easily fall into a cycle where you also become your own harshest critic, where nothing you ever do is enough, where you always dwell on what you got wrong and beat yourself up. And yeah, that can be a push to keep going forward, but it can also be the very thing that causes you to lose your confidence. And you're always questioning yourself and doubting your self-worth. And that's why you really need to learn to balance your ambitions with really just recognizing that you've shown up, you've put in the work, you've given you something your all, because you need to be your own biggest cheerleader. If you're always dragging yourself down, you're never going to get the life and success that you want. Or even if you achieve it, you're still going to feel like there's something wrong with you and you're not enough as a person. And that's why if people just take anything else away from this, learn to recognize when you're doing your best and just be kind to yourself. Like, the world is hard enough as it is. Like, entrepreneurship is a big enough battle. You don't need yourself then stack it against you by being your own worst enemy as well.
That's so important for us to recognize. And sometimes we make good or bad decisions based on how much stress and we're putting on ourselves and trying to get to that end goal. But it's so important. I appreciate you sharing all these tips and tricks and your knowledge with us, because a lot of first-time business owners, CEOs, or entrepreneurs here, they run into these struggles. They lack that confidence and they create self-doubt. And then they can't be their best person as they go forward. So, Byron, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all these tips and tricks. Excited for what the future holds for you. And if there's anything else you want to share with them, please let them know.
No, thank you for having me on. And yeah, if you want to follow more of my stuff, like I said, just connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for Byron Morrison. I put out daily content and you can find out more on that.
I love it. Thank you so much, Byron. Thanks so much and have a great day.